Well, we are glad to be broadcasting from the beautiful Lenexa Police Department right here in the heart of Lenexa for Back the Blue, tour stop number 9 on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM, where we get a chance to feature some of the great work being done by the men and women in law enforcement in our communities. And this is year 3 now. We try to do these once a quarter, and this is technically going to count as the one we've done in the first quarter, even though we know we are now in the second quarter of 2025. So the last time we were at one of these, it was up in Platte County in late 24, and we will be sharing some of the great stories from the Lenexa Police Department throughout the morning here on KCMO. A great way to highlight the men and women in law enforcement right in our backyard. So you'll be hearing some of those stories throughout the morning on KCMO Talk Radio, and I can tell you, they just moved into this place in August, and it is absolutely beautiful right off of Prairie Star Parkway. So a fantastic facility here if you are a Lenexa resident. Not that you want to be coming down to the police station, but if you have to come down to the police station, it is just top of the line facility they've got here. And I'll tell you what, Mark, I also found out this morning that I am closer to the Lenexa Police Department than I am my own Olathe Police Department. So if I need something, I'm coming up this way. I just might, hang a left and keep going north right into Lenexa because I'm closer to this police station than I am my own police station.
I like Lenexa.
Yeah. I like
a good slogan.
I like Lenexa. You're right. I like them both, man. It's great to be here. So, of course, the entire world is talking this morning, and has been for the last 36 hours, about the tariffs that President Trump put on nations around the world, as he calls them, the reciprocal tariffs. And now we have some breaking news this morning as we start the show that China has announced that they are responding with their own retaliatory tariff of 34% on all goods imported from the United States. So the trade war is kicking off. That will go into effect on April 10th, according to the Wall Street Journal. And you've got Dow futures that are now down 1,000 points on the day. And, of course, the markets are not opening up for 2.5 hours. But Dow futures are off over 1,000 points. That would make the 2-day total drop in the Dow now 2,700 points. NASDAQ futures also are off this morning by about 600, and the NASDAQ, which is all your big tech stocks, is just getting absolutely slaughtered as well. So this is what we expected. We knew it was going to be a roller coaster. We knew that it was going to be ugly. The question is, how much pain, how ugly will it get, and what exactly does this look like both short-term and long-term? And what exactly does short-term pain mean? Is short-term 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years? No one really knows. No one can answer that with any kind of confidence right now. But once again, this remains Donald Trump's strategy. The strategy here, from the Trump perspective, it's something he's believed for the better part of 35 years. He's been talking about this publicly, which is that tariffs, from his perspective, are a way to bring jobs and business back to the United States. I think ultimately he does want free and fair trade, the key word being fair. And right now it is not fair when you look at what other countries charge us versus what we charge them. Now, having a trade deficit with another country is much less important to me, and it should be less important to all of us. We're never going to have a trade surplus with some of these tiny countries all over the world. But what you do want is at least a reciprocal fair trade deal with these countries, understanding you will never have a surplus, right? I mean, it just seems impossible for the United States, the biggest consumer nation on the planet, to have a surplus with some of these countries that are a 20th of our size. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But it's more important, and the bigger part of this conversation is what it means for American jobs and what it means for American business. And we knew that it was going to be a roller coaster. Okay? Now, I thought this was interesting. I saw somebody put up yesterday that after yesterday's awful day in the stock market, the S&P 500, where the casual investor is likely invested, like the casual middle-class Main Street investor has a 401k, has an IRA, whatever, and they're invested likely in funds that just mirror the S&P. The S&P 500 is now still up 118% over the last 5 years instead of 135%, which is where it peaked last month or 6 weeks ago now. So when you look at it from that big picture perspective, the casual investor does not need to be sitting there and freaking out over one or two bad days in the stock market. Now, listen, there obviously are long-term ramifications here, and there can be a snowball effect where if the markets go completely off a cliff and into the toilet, that will impact jobs on Main Street. Like, I understand that, okay? But Main Street is not Squawk Box on CNBC. It's not. And Howard Lutnick is the Commerce Secretary, and I want to play something that he said yesterday afternoon as the markets were, yes, doing really poorly on CNN. Here's what he said as he continued to defend Donald Trump and this administration and what it's doing right now when it comes to these tariffs.
Let Donald Trump fix the American economy.
But just to follow up with you, when the first time he did tariffs, we did see prices rise on products that were tariffed. That's according to Goldman Sachs compared to non-tariff products.
We have the lowest inflation ever.
The manufacturing sector went into a mild recession in the fall of 2019. What gives you so much certainty? And by the way, this is more aggressive and the economy is in a different place with inflation and consumer sentiment. What gives you so much certainty that this is going to work and that this isn't going to hurt the everyday American?
The largest tariff and trade barrier country in the world is China. And they don't have inflation. So these things don't occur the way people suggest they do. This is a reordering of global trade for the benefit of America. These people have all been living in our house. They've been driving our car. They come by and visit, open our fridge, and eat our food whenever they want. They've taken advantage of us. Today was the day of the beginning of saying, I'm sorry, you can't just live for free off of us. You have to pay. And what's going to happen is the United States of America will get stronger. Our economy will grow much, much faster than the rest of the world.
All right,
right? If you were going to
say
where we're going,
you're not going anywhere because we're going to continue
where we're going is our markets are going to be up. And I understand that it's tough for the global markets, but our market, you should be betting on Donald Trump and the United States market. We are going to do much, much better.
Okay.
All right, that was Howard Lutnick yesterday on CNN talking about what's going on with the markets as we are looking at another bad day coming up today for the stock market, but that was to be expected. But today the news is around China and the fact that they have announced as of this morning that they are coming back with a 34% retaliatory tariff on U.S. imports that will go into effect in 6 days. That'll be on Thursday, April 10th. And obviously the markets don't like it. NASDAQ is off another 600 points. The Dow futures are off over 1,000 points so far this morning. So that will be a main theme this morning. Our buddy Mark Falter will be here at 8:30 from the Retirement Income Hour to react to this. And we were texting yesterday, and needless to say, he's going to be lit up this morning at 8:30, so do not miss that conversation on KCMO. We are live in Lenexa for our Back the Blue tour as we tell the stories from the men and women in our area police departments around the Kansas City Metro. And first time, obviously, being here in Lenexa for their beautiful headquarters that just opened up back in August. So it's absolutely fantastic. We're going to be telling those stories throughout the morning here on 95.7 FM. It is great to be here on 95.7 FM, KCMO Talk Radio. We will talk to many more folks from the Lenexa Police Department coming up throughout the morning here on KCMO. But we do have, of course, a lot to get to in just what's happening in the news cycle right now. And there's one story down in Texas that you may have seen that is going viral, and I couldn't help but think about the story here in Kansas City from, a couple of years ago now, with Ralph Yarl and Andrew Lester. Of course, Ralph Yarl is the young boy who showed up at the home of Andrew Lester in the Northland, and Andrew Lester ended up shooting him in the head. Miraculously, Ralph Yarl survived. He was a teenager. He went to the wrong home. He was trying to pick up his brother late at night. It was dark, and Andrew Lester, 86-year-old man, living by himself, got flustered. He claims that Jarl was trying to, shake the doorknob and get into the house. We'll never know because Andrew Lester is now dead. But this story became a worldwide sensation because it was old white man shoots black teen, right? This goes back to April of 23 at this point. So that became, of course, a worldwide story right here in Kansas City. This story down in Texas is not getting nearly as much national attention, at least with your national media. And you'll probably figure out why. Austin Metcalf was stabbed to death at a high school track meet in Frisco, Texas. Why? Well, because a rival from a fellow school apparently stabbed his son when he asked him to move. He asked him to literally just get up and move where he was sitting because he was in the wrong place. At least that's how the story goes right now, and there has been nothing to contradict this story. That resulted in a brawl, and a young man named Carmelo Anthony has been arrested and charged with first-degree murder down there in Frisco, Texas. And that's where the boys were for a track meet. According to the story, Austin Metcalf, was not the aggressor. He was not the one who started it. And now you've got this young man, Carmelo Anthony, who has been charged with first-degree murder. And Anthony's father is saying that his son's actions was a heat-of-the-moment mistake that brought tragedy to both families. Now, you do have a racial component here as well. Carmelo Anthony is a young black male, Austin Metcalf, a young white male. And the way that these two stories have been covered differently should not surprise you. Here's the Associated Press on both of these stories. All right? This is from February of this year regarding Andrew Lester and Ralph Jarl. The Associated Press runs this headline. The white man who pleaded guilty to shooting a black teen who rang a wrong doorbell dies. Meantime, the AP ran this story yesterday regarding Austin Metcalf down in Texas. Police say a 17-year-old was fatally stabbed by another student at a Texas track meet. What do you notice that's different between those two headlines? In one headline, the race is very clear. In the other headline, there is no race. Ask yourself why that might be. Because per the media, the race is only a factor when it meets their narrative, right? That's the only time they want to talk about race in a story. Now, I don't know if race has any role here in this Carmelo Anthony, Austin Metcalf story. I mean, you have a young black teen who stabbed a young white teen at a track meet over seemingly nothing. That's an indictment on Carmelo Anthony, not people of his skin color or anything of that nature. It's an indictment on this young man. You look at what happened here in Kansas City with Ralph Jarl and Andrew Lester. People wanted to make that out to be a white versus black thing because it fit a national narrative. And sadly, there were those in Ralph Jarl's family. I'm not saying Ralph, he was an innocent kid, but there were those in his family who used it to their advantage. They raised $3 million on a GoFundMe. There's a GoFundMe right now for Austin Metcalf to help his family. They have raised $178,000 after he was tragically stabbed at a school track meet. The GoFundMe has been put on by his father, Jeff Metcalf. And, is he going to get to Ralph Jarl money? Not even close. He won't. It's not going to get to $3 million. And by the way, not that it should come down to this, but Austin Metcalf did not survive his attack. Thank God that Ralph Jarl did. So you have a media that once again amplifies stories based on how they fit their preferred racial narrative. And when I saw the way that this Austin Metcalf story was being covered by the AP, I said, let me see what they did for Ralph Jarl. And I found a story from 6 weeks ago when Andrew Lester died. And it was very clear. they made it about race. The white man who pleaded guilty to shooting a black teen who rang a wrong doorbell dies. That's their headline, February 19th of this year. 2 days ago, police say a 17-year-old was fatally stabbed by another student at a Texas track meet. Ask yourself this. What if the races of Austin Metcalf and Carmelo Anthony had been reversed? How do you think the AP would cover that? You know the answer, and I know the answer. And ask yourself why. They care about race when it cuts one way, because that's the narrative they choose to promote. Now, Austin Metcalf's mother and twin brother were on Fox News yesterday with Will Cain. It was a very difficult interview to watch. Here's a clip of what it sounded like.
But I have seen interviews with your husband in the last 24 hours, and it was remarkable to me that I heard your husband say within hours of this that he forgave this other young man, and he got there so quickly. And I honestly don't know that I could, and I just want to see, and I don't know if there's a right or a wrong place to be, especially as quickly as this has happened. Megan, how do you feel on that front today?
I am not like their dad. I am so angry at that boy. And it's just not fair. That's all I have.
I understand.
I'd like to say it's forgave, not forgotten, but I'm not at that point yet to forgive that kid for what he did to my brother. Because, 17 years, my best friend, just there in the blink of an eye, I lost him.
That from the Will Cain show yesterday, and Will Cain's radio show airs 9 o'clock weeknights here on KCMO Talk Radio. It's a very tough watch. It's a very difficult listen. And now you have a young man facing first-degree murder charges over this at a track meet down in Frisco, Texas. And it's amazing. This is not a story that has gotten a lot of attention from our national news friends, and you know why, and I know why. Okay? It's not a secret. It's not a coincidence. They didn't forget about it. It's because the narrative not only isn't met, it's the antithesis of their narrative is what it is. On the text line, Pete, why don't you bring race into it then? Well, because that's not the point. My point is not to bring race into it. Okay? I mean, there are young black men and there are young white men and white women and Asians and Latinos at track meets all over this country this weekend, all over America. 99.999999% of them will have nothing go on except for, running track and jumping and everything else that goes on at track meets. My point is to not make this a boogeyman kind of a conversation because it's not. It's not intended to be. But when you look at how Andrew Lester was treated, man, these old white guys, when they interact with young black men, look at what happens. That's the narrative that was pursued in the wake of Andrew Lester and Ralph Yarl here in Kansas City, and it was inherently unfair. But it's achieving a goal. I'm not going to bring race into the Austin Metcalf Carmelo Anthony story because that would be unfair to young people at every track meet in America this weekend. I'm not going to stoop to their level. I have no interest in stooping to their level. The point is to call them out when they choose to stoop to their own level. That's the point here. Well, we are rolling through it in Lenexa at their beautiful new police department here on KCMO 95.7 FM. That story from Amy Rainieg, who was just on the show, who has been with the department for 3.5 years. I mean, that right there, I know that, listen, we can have more commentary on the politics of the moment than she as a professional would want to have on the air, and good on her for that. But you have an officer who spent her entire life and career in L.A. County, who now finds herself in Lenexa, living in Overland Park, working for Lenexa PD. Her husband works for the Overland Park PD. Her brother-in-law's here working for Olathe PD. They all fled California. And they fled before it got really nuts. I mean, it was only mostly nuts when they got out. Now it's completely insane. And you feel bad for these communities. Now, those communities losing good people is obviously a net benefit for us here in this case, Johnson County, at some of our municipalities, but it's like it's untenable in some of these communities. I can't imagine having spent the last 5 years with the L.A. County Sheriff's Department, and she moves for family, for cost of living, for quality of life. She had never been here in her life. She had a neighbor who just happened to be from Overland Park and went to KU and would talk about how great it was here. And that neighbor actually ends up bringing her back to her home. And I know some of you are going to be, looking at someone from California and saying, I don't know about these Californians coming here. Hey, it's like we always talk about on the show. We are a welcoming community. Just know what you're leaving, okay? And know why you're leaving. That's the most important thing. And that's what too many Californians or, New Yorkers or whatever don't understand. If you're going to leave deep blue messes for, generally speaking, redder areas, then don't bring your deep blue hot garbage to the place that you're leaving. Understand why you left. Accept the reasons for why you left. Incompetency in state government, incompetency in local government, high taxes, poor housing policy that leads to, obviously, really high housing costs, poor policing, not because of the cops themselves, but because of the politicians. If you accept why you have left and you realize, boy, I don't want to go back to that, then we'll have you. I mean, we talked about it yesterday. I'm starting year 8 on this show here on KCMO this week. This is the start of year 8 here on KCMO. I had worked in this part of the country. My first full-time radio job was in northwest Oklahoma, and I loved this part of the country, but I, spent 5 years after that in New York City and doing stuff at Fox and CBS and a lot of other places while I was there. And as much as, it was the place that I grew up, I knew it wasn't the place necessarily that I would want to or frankly be able to raise a family as we wanted to do it. So we come back out here. We had looked at 3 cities, Kansas City and Oklahoma City and Dallas. They were all on the short list. And, thank goodness this has been home for us. All 3 girls have been born here, and we're thrilled to call it home. But obviously doing this every day, it's very clear to you what our values are, what my values are, and why I would never try to push values that have failed the citizens onto any of us. In fact, there's a creep here in the Kansas City area, in some parts of our metro, to bring some of that craziness to parts of Kansas City. And it's not, it's not just KCMO. There's some craziness, trust me, in some of our suburbs that we cover all the time. There are heavy-handed governments. Heck, look at what happened in Westwood this week, where basically you had a government try to bully its citizens into selling a park so they could make a fortune off of a mixed-use space. And thankfully, the citizens won out. It's happened in Prairie Village. It's happened, unfortunately, at times in Overland Park, like it or not. But just know why you left and why you want the freedom that so many of us here in Kansas City and surrounds enjoy and appreciate. So we are monitoring the markets. Big news coming down early this morning. China has hit the U.S. with reciprocal tariffs, what they're calling it, 34% tariff on U.S. imports. Of course, a response to the president and his decision from 2 days ago to put widespread tariffs across the board on countries across the world. So this is a 34% tariff on imports coming from the U.S. into China, announced by China's finance ministry early this morning. The Dow futures off another 1,000 points. The NASDAQ off 600 points. So the markets obviously are not liking this. And here locally, you've got a big statement here from Emmanuel Cleaver. It is 3 paragraphs long. So this may be the longest statement Emmanuel Cleaver has written in his entire public career. Cleaver's statement on President Trump levying national import tax and instigating global trade war. This is the headline that Kansas City Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver has on his social media pages. He writes here, tariffs are not an all-encompassing economic strategy. at least not the one that is made for long-term prosperity. When used appropriately, they are a tool in America's toolbox to protect vital industries and our national security. When used inappropriately, as I believe the president is doing with across-the-board import taxes on our allies and adversaries alike, they lead to higher prices, fewer jobs, slower economic growth, and more contentious relationships with nations around the world. With inflation already on the rise again due to previously implemented tariffs, this is a recipe for disaster. I'm just glad that Emmanuel Cleaver, after 5 years, is recognizing inflation happened in this country. Aren't you? He writes here, Missouri families, including our farmers, are already struggling with the cost of living. Another admission that we didn't get until now from Emmanuel Cleaver, but it's nice to actually hear. But rather than focusing on lowering essentials like groceries, housing, and health care, President Trump has instigated, per Cleaver, a reckless trade war, and the American people will pay the price. The president has admitted himself that these new taxes will create more pain for American families, farmers, and small businesses, saying that he could not care less about the prospect of higher prices on everything from cars to groceries. Well, he didn't say that about groceries. He did say that about vehicles. Well, the American people care, and they will make their feelings known if the president does not quickly reverse course, repair the relationships that America has spent decades forging, and focus on lowering costs for the public. That was the official statement from Emmanuel Cleaver, and then he also had a secondary statement that read as follows.
You mustard moo.
Yep, that was the secondary statement that came from Cleaver as well after the official statement dropped yesterday afternoon. Listen, it's a high-stakes, high-risk gamble that Donald Trump is taking here. We all know that. But if it was all about portfolios and if elections were determined by the stock market, Kamala Harris would have won in a landslide. Joe Biden spent $300 billion the last couple of months to try to goose the stock market with cheap money to try to basically buy people's votes into saying, you know what, I'll keep this thing going with Kamala. And it's why the stock market did so well in the wake of COVID. And by the way, some of that is obviously Trump's fault because we spent way too much money that we did not have during COVID-19. And we got addicted to this cheap, easy money. And then we paid the price by way of inflation. And it's been obviously a very difficult 4 years on that front with 20 to 25% price hikes across the board and a jobs market that, unless you work in government in some capacity, has not exactly been on fire. I mean, the Bureau of Labor Statistics show that for the last few years, the government has been a top 3 employer in this country, and that's also not sustainable. You can't keep growing government at that pace without growing the private sector. The path we were on was unsustainable. Now, do I think that these tariffs are magically going to turn course for the country? I'm hesitant to believe that's going to be the case, but I also knew that Donald Trump was somebody who ran on this idea. I mean, I keep hearing this narrative that there is buyer's remorse from Trump voters because of what's happened this week, and I can't imagine that is actually the case broadly speaking. Broadly speaking, assuming that you care about the country beyond like your own portfolio next week. Because he ran on this idea, he knew and he admitted, and he also at least said there was going to be pain, right? Like that's one thing that I do at least appreciate. He's been honest with us about pain and saying, yes, there will be some pain, but we're playing a long game here on resetting the economy for America to work for everybody, to work for a robust middle class, to work for Main Street and not just work for Wall Street. He's at least been honest about that. The other guys, when's the last time they were honest with you? I mean, they told you inflation was transitory. Then they were like, it's not that bad. Then it was like, everything's great. Look at the stock market. They basically buried their heads in the sand and tried to convince you that things were much better than they actually were. And if you didn't think they were that good, well, guess what? That's on you. So you never got this level of honesty from them on a lot of the stuff that we've seen, at least this week. How much pain are people willing to endure on the markets? Does inflation actually start to pick up again? It's entirely possible that it does, and that's why there's got to be a plan here from the administration on what that looks like, how much pain they are willing to endure, how much pain the American people are willing to endure, and whether or not this is something that actually does backfire. I hope it doesn't. I've got the guy's back. It's what I knew he was going to try to do, so I'm not backing off him at all. And I know many of you are not going to back off him at all. And the other thing I can't help but think about here is that the people who have been wrong about literally everything for the last 5 years are like the most outraged by this. The people who are wrong about COVID, the people who are wrong about, defunding the police, the people who are wrong about inflation, spending money we don't have on dumb things like green energy plans left and right, all the way through this past November. The people who have been wrong about every single thing for half a decade are the most outraged. Now, maybe that blind squirrel does find that nut once in a blue moon. A broken clock is right twice a day. Maybe this is their moment. It might be. It very well might be. But a part of me can't help but think about that as well. And it is a beautiful police department to walk into here in Lenexa. And the first thing one of the gentlemen asked me as we got going here, and he's done a great job helping us coordinate this, Danny Chavez with the Lenexa Police Department. He goes, hey, yeah. I was like, wow, this place is nice. He's like, you ever been here before? It's like, no, I try to avoid our police departments as much as I can, to be totally honest. I mean, I love you guys. I got your back more than anybody in Kansas City media, but I try to not spend much time in police departments. It's, so far I've done a pretty good job of that, by the way. I'll say that much. I should probably knock on wood as I make that statement, but I do my best to avoid police departments in my spare time. So that's why it's great to come out here and see some of these spots as well and see, these buildings. Olathe's got a new department. We were there last year. You've got this new one now in Lenexa. They are renovating some of these police departments all over our metro as well. So KCMO got a bunch of renovations to its various police department locations around town over the last few years. And that's actually, what's on the ballot coming up on Tuesday, of course, is this, what's being dubbed the jail tax. And what it is an infrastructure tax. It's a rollover of a sales tax for 20 years. And what it will be used for, at least the bulk of it will be used for, is building the new jail downtown. What it's been used for over the last bunch of years is basically refurbishing all the different locations that KCMO has for its police department. Metro Patrol, Central Patrol, East Patrol. They upgraded a lot of those buildings, and then they also built the new facility up north, which is where I have done the virtual training with some folks in their department under the previous administration. So this new tax, or this rollover tax, not a new tax, but a rollover tax, will be used to build the jail downtown. And there are some who are against it. The Urban Council in Kansas City has come out against it. That's to be expected. They're against everything. They're also the ones who wanted to fire Brian Platt, the city manager, last week, and they got their wish there. But they're trying to call this the jail tax as if that's like a negative connotation. As if, oh, no, people in Kansas City won't vote for a jail tax. In fact, I'm fine with them dubbing it the jail tax. Usually, I would be like, hey, that's a disingenuous name for this issue, this tax, whatever it might be. You want to call it the jail tax? Great. I'll double down on that. I'll play your game when it comes to this one because guess what? The damn city needs a jail. You're shipping people out to Johnson County, Missouri and Vernon County, Missouri. It's ridiculous. It's long overdue for Kansas City to bring back a jail. I mean, even Quentin Lucas is endorsing it. Like the Kansas City Star even endorsed it. And then they took a shower because they were so disgusted with themselves. If you read their endorsement in the Kansas City Star, and I read it yesterday. I'm not going to bore you with it on the air. But basically, it's like 1,000 words of them hedging themselves, being like, we're endorsing this, but we still know that cops can't always be trusted and law enforcement has a lot of problems, but we're going to endorse the new jail. Even they could not get themselves, as woke as they are, to go against having a jail in downtown Kansas City, Missouri, which tells you a lot, okay? If the Star can even figure out a way to get itself on the right side on this deal and endorse a tax or an extension of a tax to build a jail downtown, you know just how bad it is. Because if there is anybody in this community who wants to find itself on, first off, just the wrong side in general, but certainly the anti-cop side, it is the Kansas City Star. They, generally speaking, cannot help themselves on this front. So when they come around, you know that we are in a place where it's long overdue. Long overdue. Of course, they weren't doing this back in 2020 when people are trying to burn down the plaza. Then they were supporting the Kansas City, Missouri City Council at that time, dropping charges of protesters who had broken the law. Never forget that. One of the most insane things I've seen in my time here on KCMO. But they will conveniently sweep that one under the rug. Now, we are just a couple of minutes away from the markets opening up here at 8:30 on KCMO Talk Radio, and the futures are down 1,000 points on the Dow, 2.5%. S&P futures are also off 2.5%. NASDAQ futures off 500 points, 2.5%. So the Dow is set to open up off 1,000 points. After yesterday, it dropped 1,600 points for its worst day since 2020. Of course, the tariffs are the main driver on this, and this morning you had China announce that they will have a 34% reciprocal tariff on the United States. So the trade war is officially underway. Mark Falter is with the Retirement Income Hour. He's going to join us here in a few minutes. But I do want to also note this here. Dug up the old Barack Obama clip, and I want to play this from Barack Obama talking about tariffs that he put on China to help our workers. Let's roll the tape from a presidential debate in 2012.
We had a tire case in which they were flooding us with cheap domestic tires or cheap Chinese tires. And we put a stop to it. And as a consequence, saved jobs throughout America. I have to say that Governor Romney criticized me for being too tough in that tire case. Said this wouldn't be good for American workers and that it would be protectionist. But I tell you, those workers don't feel that way. They feel as if they had finally an administration who was going to take this issue seriously.
Barack Obama in a 2012 presidential debate with Mitt Romney talking about tariffs to prevent cheap Chinese goods from flooding the U.S. market. I don't know if Trump's going to win this tariff game. I don't. He obviously took a very different approach going across the board against all countries. But certainly when it comes to China, we have got to separate ourselves from the Chinese. Of course, I mean the Chinese Communist Party, their government. We have got to separate ourselves from the communist thugs who are trying to overtake us as the world superpower and have the worst intentions in mind while doing it. That should be the least controversial thing that Trump has done during his time in office. And if you can't see that, I mean, you have got to take off those TDS glasses and look at this thing for what it is.